A former Wisconsin elementary school aide accused of a parent's worst nightmare, sexually assaulting and preying on her own students, is now facing decades in prison after a shocking admission in court. Police say the evidence against Anna Marie Crocker wasn't just the words of children. We're going inside the disturbing criminal complaint that lays out the case and the shocking evidence against this woman. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. All right, real quick, before we dive into this episode of On the Case, I want to talk about something that people are saying is the single biggest financial development that is shaping everything we know about money. Central banks are hoarding and purchasing physical gold at a pace that hasn't been seen in decades. Gold is up 40% in the past year, and experts say it's not stopping. So how do you get in without dropping thousands up front? Acre Gold makes it simple to own physical gold without expense. With subscriptions from $30 to $250 per month, anyone can start by making monthly payments at your own pace. When you reach the price of your bar, Acre Gold ships it right to your door. Real gold that you can have, you can save, you can pass down. Secure your wealth and take control of your future. Start today at getacregold.com/onthecase. We have a major update in a horrific case that we have been following. It involves a woman named Anna Marie Crocker. She is a former Wisconsin elementary school aide who was accused of sexually assaulting a student and preying on several other young boys. And the allegations, I will warn you, they are incredibly disturbing. Truly a parent's worst nightmare. A 12-year-old boy told police that Crocker assaulted him at a sleepover, saying that he told her to, quote, repeatedly get off. Now, another boy said that she sent him an explicit video that he thought was a, quote, workout video. The criminal complaint laid out a pattern of predatory behavior. After months of legal proceedings, this case reached a dramatic conclusion in court. But before we get to that part of the story, you have to understand how this all started. Now, if you haven't been following this one, Anna Marie Crocker, she's 33 years old, and again, she was a teacher's aide at an elementary school, specifically Riverview Elementary School in Silver Lake, Wisconsin. This is southern Wisconsin, close to the Illinois border. Now, she started as a substitute back in 2020, then became a full-time educational assistant, a staffer whose job was to protect and to support kids. That, of course, came crashing down in October of last year, when rumors started to circulate about Crocker and a boy at school. Now, here's how it started. According to the criminal complaint, police were first called to a home after a parent reached out, concerned about inappropriate contact between Crocker and his son. Now, Crocker was the mom of this child's friend, so there was a relationship that went beyond the classroom. Detectives spoke to the 13-year-old boy. He told them a chilling story about an incident that had happened months earlier in the winter. Now, he said he was at a sleepover at Crocker's house. He fell asleep on the couch in the basement of her home, and he told police when he woke up, Crocker was on top of him. His pants had been removed. Now, he said that he told her repeatedly to get off and tried to push her away, but she wouldn't stop. Other kids at the sleepover saw this. They say they came downstairs, they saw her run to hide. Now, the boy was 12 years old at the time. The boy that Crocker, who was in her 30s, was on top of. But that was just the first alarm bell. If you can imagine, there are many more. As police dug in, more boys came forward. Another 13-year-old boy told investigators that Crocker had added him on Snapchat. We have seen that app come up plenty of times in stories. Now, he said that she sent him videos of herself performing a sex act. Now, he told police that when he first opened one, he thought it was a workout video. He said that he didn't respond because he was, quote, too young for that. He also said that he was scared because he had heard that she had, quote, raped another boy. A search of Crocker's phone allegedly backed this up. Police say they found the videos that the boy described. They also found that she had exchanged over 200 messages, photos, and videos with this boy in just a matter of days. Then, a 14-year-old boy came forward. He said that he and Crocker had exchanged sexual messages and pictures on Snapchat. He also alleged that she sexually assaulted him in a parking lot in August. Now, perhaps most brazenly, the complaint details conversations with the 16-year-old boy that are just too graphic for us to even show you. Now, police say that Crocker added him on Snapchat on October 9th, 2024, just one day before she was arrested. In those messages, they allege that she asked if he wanted to have sex with her and tried to make plans for him to come to her house. Now, that meeting never happened because she was taken into custody. The school district fired her immediately. The charges piled up: first-degree sexual assault of a child, child enticement, possession of child pornography, sexual exploitation of a child, exposing genitals, exposing a child to harmful material, and exposing a child to harmful descriptions. Now, the case then moved into a lengthy legal process, including a mental competency examination. For months, it seemed like this case was headed to trial, but everything has changed. In a Kenosha County courtroom, Anna Marie Crocker changed the course of her case. According to Fox 6 out of Milwaukee, she chose to plead guilty to first and second degree child sexual assault, child sexual exploitation, child enticement, intimidation of a victim, and use of a computer to facilitate a child sex crime. Now, several other charges were dismissed as part of a plea agreement. The Kenosha County District Attorney's Office said in a statement, quote, "People who work in schools hold positions of trust and authority over children, and when that trust is violated through sexual abuse, it represents a profound betrayal of trust and an immense abuse of power. Such perpetrators will be aggressively prosecuted." So let's go inside the criminal complaint that lays out in devastating detail, I will tell you, the allegations that led to the plea. Now, the first official police response was on October 8th, 2024, when a deputy from the Kenosha County Sheriff's Office was dispatched to a home in Twin Lakes. The call, it was every parent's worst nightmare. A father reported his 13-year-old son had been, quote, forced to have sex with the mother of his friend. The deputy met with the boy, who we will refer to as ZG. He was just 13 years old, born only in 2011. Now, the boy said that he had known the defendant, Anna Crocker, for about 2 years. He described her as acting, quote, crazy when he was over because she was a, quote, heavy drinker. Then he recounted the incident from the previous winter. He was at Crocker's house in Paddock Lake for a sleepover. They played basketball, video games, then went to bed around midnight. The victim was asleep on a basement couch. He told the deputy, quote, while asleep on the couch, he was awoken by the defendant, who was naked. The defendant had removed ZG's pants and was on top of him. Now, he said that his friends heard noises, came downstairs, and saw Crocker try to hide. But the complaint reveals that this disclosure only happened after a tense afternoon. Earlier that day, ZG's mom, her name is Stacy, got a text from another mom named Denise. Now, Denise and her son, who goes by the initials JP, had been confronted at school by a girl yelling at him about having sex with Crocker. When ZG's parents asked him about it, he initially said nothing, but then he became physically ill. His mom found him dry heaving in the bathroom. Now, he told her, quote, I thought I would never have to think about it again. Just think about that, a kid 13 years old saying something just so heartbreaking as he is become physically ill, thinking about the trauma that this person put upon him. Now, lying down, he admitted to his mom that Crocker had sex with him and that it was non-consensual, that he had been sexually assaulted by this woman. Now, ZG was taken for a forensic interview the next day, and there he provided even more specific and harrowing details. When asked what happened next, he said it was too hard to say out loud. The interviewer gave him a piece of paper, and he wrote down what the defendant made him do. And what he wrote, it's too graphic for us to quote directly on air, but it described a very specific and forceful sexual act. He told the interviewer that he repeatedly told her to get off and tried to push her away. He also disclosed that months later, Crocker had texted him telling him to apologize to her, quote, for what happened in the basement. He said she was trying to make him feel guilty and warned him not to tell anyone. He says that he blocked her number. Then on October 10th, Twin Lakes, Wisconsin police were called to another home. A 13-year-old boy who's going by CPW had reported to a school staff member that he had received inappropriate material from Crocker on Snapchat. CPW told police that she had added him and they chatted for about 2 weeks. It started normal, then he says it got, quote, weird. He said that she sent a picture of herself with a vibrator in bed next to her along with the video. And he told a forensic interviewer, quote, when CPW first opened it, he thought it was a workout video. He clicked through it, didn't respond, and said, quote, I'm too young for that. He said he was scared because his friend ZG had told him that Crocker, quote, raped him. Now, police searched Crocker's downloaded Snapchat data and they found that she had added CPW on September 20th, 2024. In just 3 days, they had exchanged 239 messages, including 7 media files. Now, the last video from her to him was sent at 11:56 p.m. on September 23rd. The complaint then details her contact with a third boy. His initials, RDH, and he is a friend of the boy who goes by the initials CPW. That's the boy who Crocker sent videos to that he thought was a workout video. Now, he said that Crocker added him on Snapchat and sent him, quote, weird messages. When she asked how old he was, and he said 13, she replied, quote, I like that. He says he blocked her immediately. But perhaps the most brazen evidence, and that's saying a lot because this is very brazen to this point, it was found in her Snapchat data with a fourth boy who is 16 years old, and he is known as CDW. The data showed that she added him on October 9th, 2024, which is just 1 day before her arrest. The messages show her asking his age, telling him her age and that she was a teacher. Then she turns the conversation sexual, where she asks him for sex and then makes plans for him to come to her house on Friday, October 11th, 2024. Now, of course, she was in custody by then. When interviewed, SDW confirmed the messages and said that she had sent him pictures where sex was, quote, inferred. It is this detailed digital roadmap of abuse that she ultimately admitted to in court. Joining us now to talk a little bit more about this case is practice professor of law at Temple University, Marian Bracha. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. This is just so disturbing that what this woman's accused, or not accused, she pled guilty to this. You're a former child abuse and sex crimes prosecutor, and just having prosecuted cases like this, similar cases, what stands out to you about Anna Marie Crocker?
Well, in all likelihood, I think the thing that stands out to most people when they hear stories like this is the gender of the parties involved. And I think that's probably the thing that is most notable, right? A lot of the cases that we hear about in the media or that get a lot of high publicity are female defendants with male complainants or male victims. And I just think it's important to note that sexual abuse and taking advantage of vulnerable victims really has no gender lines. Abused victims can be male or female. Sex abuse perpetrators can be male or female. So I just think it's important to note that regardless of the identity of either the perpetrator or the victims, that it's important to listen to these complaints and take them seriously.
And part of the, as we were going through the story, is there's this 12-year-old boy who's 13 at the time this happened. It's just like you can tell. I mean, he couldn't even verbally say during a forensic interview what had been done to him. He needed to write it down, and it just kind of speaks to the trauma that this woman inflicted on not just him but multiple people. There's such a massive digital trail, it seems, for prosecutors in this case. She communicated on Snapchat. She sent videos on Snapchat. What's the defense typically when someone has a client and there's this massive digital trail? What does a defense attorney typically do?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, of course, there are pretrial constitutional motions to suppress the evidence. So the argument from the defense at that point would be that the evidence that was procured from the defendant's cell phone was illegally obtained, meaning that it wasn't pursuant to a warrant or that it exceeded the bounds of a warrant that had been issued. If that fails, then there are other more trial-specific strategy techniques that can be undertaken. For instance, a defense might be that there was a mistake of age, meaning that the defendant didn't realize the age of the person that she was communicating with. I think that the content of the messages in this case would belie that, would undermine the viability of that defense, because there was specific conversation about the age of the person, at least one of the people that she was speaking to. And then next, there's always an avenue of pleading that someone else was using the defendant's account or device to have these conversations, that it wasn't the defendant herself who was engaging in this form of communication with the victims, that someone else was acting on under her identity or using her account in an unauthorized way. So there are always avenues to potentially separate the defendant from the actual activity of these communications.
I noticed too that they had a mental competency exam of her, like when all of this goes through. What would it, I mean, she was a teacher's aide, so she had a respectable job. Mom to a son who apparently knew some of these victims. What would her not being mentally competent, like what would that actually look like if that were the case in something like this?
Well, I think it varies state by state, but I think ultimately the legal test for competence is to understand the situation that the defendant is in, that the party is in, and the potential ramifications, the potential consequences of what could happen by going through with or participating in the prosecution, meaning that she realizes that she's being accused by the state of some criminal act or acts, that she would appreciate or recognize that there are criminal penalties that could be potentially inflicted by a judge if and when she were to be found guilty, and then that there are future consequences, meaning that there's a potential for sentencing or a potential for Megan's Law registration or potential for ongoing supervision. And so long as the defendant kind of understands appreciates and understands the kind of current situation that she's in and the potential consequences that she's facing, that is generally speaking what we'd consider for competence.
And what stood out to me with just what was laid out by law enforcement when she was arrested was just how brazen a lot of this was. That she would do this when a young boy is sleeping over her house, that there were other boys in the house when it happened, that she would send videos to them. Just having prosecuted cases like this, what do you make of just someone doing this so awful? Not only just that, but to do it in a way where it seems like they just didn't care because it was going out on Snapchat. It was going out. It just seems like it was so brazen what she was doing.
I think brazen is a good word for it. I think that there is a lot of comfort, if that's even the right word to use, that there is perhaps a perception that there is a safe distance when communicating digitally with people, because again, things might get lost in the ether, things might just go up into the cloud. There's the question of whether these communications can really be linked back to the parties that are alleged to have engaged in them. So I think there is both a comfort level with not engaging in a physical or actual way. There's a big difference between, a face-to-face communication or a solicitation for certain activity and doing so behind the protection and the veil of a screen and a keyboard. Of course, our laws adjust to that, and our laws recognize that pursuing a minor and soliciting a minor for certain illicit and unlawful activities isn't just limited to actual physical correspondence or physical communications, that our society now recognizes that digital and virtual communications are just as unlawful or potentially so as they would have been and were in person.
As she enters her guilty plea, she pleaded guilty to a range of charges that I have here. First degree child sexual assault, and in Wisconsin that carries a maximum of 60 years. What happens now? Where does it go in terms of, we know what she's admitted to doing. All the details are terrible. You can tell the impact that she has had on these young men for the rest of their lives, I'm sure. What happens next in the process?
So in the space between the entry of the guilty plea and the sentencing hearing, there are a number of pre-sentencing activities that can happen. The defendant will likely go for a series of evaluations. One of them can be for substance abuse, drug and alcohol dependence. That might be or could be a component of a sentence when it is entered in the spring of 2026 or in the early part of 2026. Another evaluation would be a mental health evaluation, and that is separate from a competency evaluation. That is something to determine whether there is a mental disease or illness, not necessarily whether the defendant is competent to participate in her own defense or really appreciate the consequences of a potential prosecution. Again, depending on the state, I realize this prosecution and this guilty plea happened in Wisconsin. Certain states will refer defendants to what's known as a sexual offender assessment board, and that is where an assessment is made by a state-authorized psychiatrist to determine the level of risk that a particular defendant, especially in sex abuse cases and child sex abuse cases, presents regarding potential for recidivism or re-offense. And that is often also the determination for what category of registration a defendant will fall in under the Megan's Law. So, as you know, certain sexually based offenses will trigger a registration requirement in a particular state or in particular communities for community members to be aware that someone with a prior sex offense is living among them or living in the community. Again, depending on the state, that can be for a period of years, it can be for 5 years, it can be for 10 years, or it can be lifelong registration. Sometimes that registration requirement is dependent upon the charge that the defendant is found guilty of or has, in this case, pled guilty to. Other times it will be as a result of information garnered or the assessment that is made pursuant to that sexual offender assessment board evaluation. And so those are the steps and the things that are happening between now and the sentencing date. It's also a time for prosecutors to gather victim impact statements from any of the complainants, any of the victims that are named in the complaint, and or their parents, their family members, to share in open court what kind of effect this crime has had on their family and on the well-being of the victim in this case. And it's also a time for the defense to gather any mitigation materials, meaning are there people in the community who can speak well or highly on behalf of the defendant and say, this is actually a person of good character. This is someone whose behavior in this case was an aberration or was an anomaly, and this is not the kind of person we know or knew as an upstanding member of the community. It's also a constitutional right that the defendant has to present what's known as an allocution, to present any information or make any statement on her own behalf at the time of sentencing, and that's an opportunity for her to throw herself at the mercy of the court. That's an opportunity to present her own mitigation information. That's an opportunity for her, if she chooses, to apologize to the victims or to their families. So it's really, kind of an open communication opportunity on behalf of the defendant that they do not have to avail themselves of. Remember that the right to remain silent exists even through the sentencing phase, but it is an opportunity to present information that the defense might feel would be helpful to the defendant, and perhaps have an impact on the judge's determination at the sentencing hearing.
It seems like in this case that Snapchat was the main kind of app that was used for the suspect in this case, Anna Marie Crocker, now the defendant, now someone who's pleaded guilty, and these young boys. And just how has, for you, social media played a role in some of these cases? Because it seems like she was able to get in touch with the boys through this avenue, but then at the same time, it seems like law enforcement and prosecutors have a lot more concrete evidence that helps their cases. Yeah.
So I think that social media has provided an avenue and really a very fertile ground for evidentiary discovery of potentially criminal activity. I think that sometimes social media platforms provide a little bit of a safety blanket or something of a perceived veil for criminal activity, meaning that, if I'm behind a screen or behind a keyboard, my intent can't really be related back to me, or my actual transmission of these communications can't be linked back to me. And even with the perception of Snapchat as, messages that disappear and they just go away, that's really not entirely accurate. And there is a digital trace of almost everything we do online, especially when it comes to direct user-to-user communications on platforms like Snapchat and other social media accounts. So you're absolutely right that these social media and other digital forms of communication have given prosecutors and investigators quite fertile ground for, again, evidentiary discovery and for using these communications and these chains of the use of these platforms to show kind of an ongoing course of conduct. It sometimes can show grooming, it can show a pursuit of a particular victim, it can show knowledge on the part of the defendant about the age of the person that they are communicating with. And of course, it will come down to if and when these challenges are made, it comes down to whether or not these accounts and these printouts and these communications can be authenticated. That means that they can be linked back to the platform from which they originated, and they can be linked to the defendant who is alleged to have sent these communications or engaged in these communications. So it's just kind of a new terrain, just as DNA evidence was at one point new in the world of criminal prosecution. Social media communications and the demonstration of intent or knowledge or other inchoate offenses are provable with the use of social media and other digital forms of communication and relationships.
Yeah, and it's just, in this case, played a big role for prosecutors. Just a shocking case out of Wisconsin. Marian Bracha, thank you for taking the time to be with us as always here at Law and Crime.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Anna Marie Crocker now awaits her fate with her sentencing hearing scheduled for February 3rd, 2026. She remains in custody. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.